Chapter 1. The Shape of a Quiet Life. Carson Drews liked mornings because they didn't ask questions. They arrived the same way every day, cool, quiet, and predictable. His alarm went off at 5:30 a.m., not because he needed to be up that early, but because he preferred it. Early hours belonged to people who didn't need an audience. He showered, shaved, and dressed with the same efficient economy he brought to everything else. Black coffee, toast, 1 egg, no radio, no television. Noise was unnecessary. By 6:30, Carson was outside, walking the same route through the neighborhood, hands in the pockets of his jacket, eyes alert without being obvious about it. He noticed things without staring. Car that didn't belong. A light that stayed on longer than usual. A jogger who changed pace abruptly. Old habits. He didn't bother correcting them. People assumed calm meant passive. Carson knew better. Calm was something you chose. By 8 o'clock, he was at work, nodding at coworkers who returned the gesture with varying degrees of familiarity. He worked in logistics coordination for a mid-sized import company. Nothing glamorous, nothing stressful if you respected systems. Carson respected systems. Systems worked if you worked them. "Morning, Drews," Mike called from 2 desks down. "Morning." That was usually the extent of it. Carson wasn't unfriendly. He just didn't decorate his words. Over time, people learned not to expect more. They also learned he was dependable. Quiet guys always were. At lunch, Carson sat with the same group, Mike, Tessa, and Ramon, mostly because they'd all started around the same time and habit was efficient. Conversation flowed around him like water around a rock. He contributed when it mattered. "Anybody doing anything interesting this weekend?" Tessa asked. "Wedding," Ramon said. "Open bar. I will survive." Mike laughed. "Drews." Carson considered the question. "Probably laundry." Mike snorted. "Man lives dangerously." Carson smiled faintly. That was enough. No one here knew he'd once been trained to disappear in hostile terrain. No one knew the sound of rotor blades still threaded itself through his dreams sometimes, or that his knee ached when the weather shifted. He preferred it this way. The past didn't need witnesses. After work, he stopped at the same grocery store he'd been using for years. He knew the layout well enough to move through it without thinking. Basket filled in under 10 minutes. Efficiency was a form of kindness to yourself. He was reaching for a box of pasta when someone spoke beside him. "Excuse me, do you know if this is actually edible?" Carson turned. The woman held up a package of gluten-free lasagna sheets with the same skepticism one might reserve for suspicious plumbing. "I don't know," Carson said. "Depends on your definition." She blinked, then smiled. It wasn't performative. It landed, settled. That's not encouraging. Honesty rarely is. She studied him for a moment, then the box. "Have you tried it?" "No." "Then why do you sound so confident?" Carson shrugged. "Experience. With pasta. With disappointment." That earned him a quiet laugh, surprised, like she hadn't expected one. She set the box back on the shelf. "Thank you for saving me from myself. Happy to help." She reached for regular lasagna sheets instead. "I'm Ellie." He hesitated a fraction of a second, long enough to notice himself doing it. "Carson." "Nice to meet you, Carson. You shop like a man who doesn't waste time." "Food's still food," he said, spoken like someone who's never cried over a failed bechamel. "I've cried over worse things." She looked at him again, more carefully this time. Carson felt it, the subtle recalibration. He didn't shift under it. He never did. "Well," Ellie said, "if you ever feel like risking pasta-based heartbreak, I make a decent lasagna." "That's generous of you," Carson said. "But I don't accept invitations from strangers in grocery aisles." "Fair." She smiled again. "Then I'll phrase it differently. If our paths cross again, and you decide I'm no longer a stranger, the offer stands." Carson considered the math. Low risk, no expectation. "We'll see," he said. She nodded, unoffended. "We will." They parted without exchanging numbers, without promises, without anything resembling drama. Carson checked out, drove home, cooked dinner, and ate in silence. Later, as he washed his single plate, he realized something had changed. Not dramatically, not enough to matter, just enough to notice. That night, he opened his laptop and reread the latest email from his daughter. Short, polite, written more out of obligation than affection. He replied carefully, as he always did. No pressure, no guilt, just presence. He closed the laptop and sat in the quiet. Boring, he reminded himself, was what he wanted. Still, when he lay down to sleep, the image that surfaced wasn't of his routine or his work or his past. It was a woman holding a box of lasagna like it had personally betrayed her. Carson exhaled slowly. Variables, he knew, were unavoidable. Chapter 2. Disruptions and variables. Carson didn't expect to see her again. Not because he doubted the possibility in some philosophical way, just because life tended to keep its lines neatly separated. Grocery stores were neutral ground. People drifted through them, brushed briefly against each other, and vanished back into their own routines. So when he walked into the small neighborhood cafe 3 blocks from his apartment the following Saturday and saw Ellie at the counter, he stopped just inside the door. Not abruptly. Nothing about Carson was abrupt, but he paused long enough to register the change in probability. She was wearing jeans and a soft gray sweater, hair pulled back loosely, one hand wrapped around a coffee cup while she spoke to the barista. She laughed at something he said, head tilting slightly, and Carson noted, without assigning meaning to it, that she laughed with her eyes as much as her mouth. He waited. Patience was easy. When she turned and spotted him, her surprise was immediate and unfiltered. "Well," she said, stepping aside to let the next customer order. "Look at that. The universe has a sense of humor." "So it does," Carson replied. She looked him over once, openly. "You live nearby." "Yes." "Good," she said. "That means this isn't fate. It's geography. Much more reasonable." Carson considered that. "I prefer explanations that don't require belief." "Same," Ellie said. "I'm still waiting on science to explain why oat milk exists." They fell into step together toward the pickup counter, standing shoulder to shoulder with a comfortable amount of space between them. Carson noticed she didn't crowd him, didn't angle her body to force engagement. It was a small thing. It mattered. "Coffee?" she asked. "Black." She nodded approvingly. "Trust issues or discipline?" "Efficiency." "Ah, a purist. I don't complicate what doesn't need it." Ellie accepted her drink from the barista and took a sip. "You sound like someone who's had to learn that the hard way." Carson didn't answer immediately. He weighed the cost. Neutral observation didn't require defense. "Experience is a teacher," he said. "Expensive one." "Yes." They took a table near the window. Outside, the morning was slow and unambitious. People walking dogs, a cyclist coasting rather than racing. Carson preferred it this way. Cities were best when they exhaled. Ellie leaned back in her chair. "So, Carson, what do you do when you're not saving strangers from tragic pasta purchases?" "I work in logistics." "That tracks." He raised an eyebrow. "How so?" "You have an orderly energy," she said. "Like you alphabetize your spices." "I don't," he said. "But I know where everything is." "See? Order. Not obsession. There's a difference." "What do you do?" he asked. "I work with kids," Ellie said. "Speech therapy. Mostly elementary aged." Carson nodded. "That requires patience. And a sense of humor," she added. "Children are honest in a way that can be brutal. I imagine. They once told me I had sad eyebrows." He almost smiled. Almost. She noticed anyway. "There it is. There what is? Proof you're not a robot." He took a sip of his coffee. "The jury's still out." They talked easily, about unimportant things. Favorite foods, the merits of walking versus driving, why weekends never felt long enough even when nothing was scheduled. Carson found himself contributing more than usual, not because she drew him out, but because she didn't try to. She listened. She remembered what he said. When there was a pause, it didn't itch. Eventually, Ellie glanced at her watch. "I should go. I've got paperwork calling my name." "Paperwork rarely calls," Carson said. "It screams," she replied. "In triplicate." They stood. For a moment, neither of them moved toward the door. "Well?" she said, hands sliding into her pockets. "This was nice." "Yes," Carson agreed. He meant it. She hesitated. "I don't usually do this, but..." He waited. "Would you like to get dinner sometime?" Proper dinner. Plates. Chairs. No grocery store lighting. Carson felt the old reflex rise, measure, minimize, retreat. He examined it without judgment. It had kept him safe. It had also kept him alone. He thought of his daughter's emails. Short, careful. Of how distance, once established, tended to expand. "Dinner," he said. "Yes." Ellie's smile was slower this time. Warmer. "Good." They exchanged numbers. Felt oddly ceremonial, like marking a map. As Carson walked home, he noted the subtle disruption in his internal landscape. Not chaos. Not excitement. Just a recalculation. The following week passed with the same outward shape as always, but Carson noticed the changes in texture. He checked his phone more often. He caught himself thinking ahead, not in contingencies, but in possibilities. At work, Mike squinted at him across the lunch table. "You're in a good mood." "I am." "You finished your sandwich before we even started talking." "That's efficiency happiness." Carson ignored him. Dinner with Ellie was Wednesday night. She chose the restaurant. Small, quiet, attentive without hovering. Carson approved. They talked longer this time. About childhood. About choices that looked different in hindsight. Ellie spoke honestly without oversharing. Carson did the same. "You don't talk much about yourself," she said at one point. "I talk," he replied. "I just don't decorate." She smiled. "I don't need decoration. Just substance." That landed somewhere deep. When the check came, Carson paid without comment. Ellie didn't protest. Another small thing. Outside, the night air was cool. They stood on the sidewalk, the restaurant's light spilling around them. "I had a good time," Ellie said. "So did I." She studied him, then nodded once. "I'll see you again." He liked that she said it as a statement, not a question. "Yes," Carson said. "You will." She leaned in and kissed him, Brief, deliberate, respectful. Not a promise. An acknowledgement. As she walked away, Carson stood still, hands in his pockets, breathing evenly. The math was changing. Not dangerously, just enough to matter. Chapter 3. The cost of distance. Carson measured time differently than most people. Weeks were units. Months were obstacles. Years were something you survived, not something you celebrated. So when his phone chimed on a Thursday afternoon with a calendar reminder, video call, Lily, 6 p.m., he didn't feel anticipation so much as readiness. He finished his work, shut down his computer, and drove home with the quiet focus of someone preparing for a task he cared about deeply but didn't entirely understand how to succeed at. He set his phone on the small kitchen table, adjusted the lighting, and waited. At exactly 6, the screen flickered. Hi, Dad. Hi, Lily. She was 10 now, almost 11. Long brown hair pulled into a messy ponytail, face thinner than he remembered from the last visit. Kids changed in increments you missed when you weren't there to witness them daily. How's school? He asked. She shrugged. Fine. What does fine mean today? She considered that. Math test was hard. I think I did okay. I never doubted that, Carson said. She smiled faintly, then glanced off-screen. Probably her mother nearby. Carson didn't resent that. He understood boundaries. They talked about neutral things. School. Her new dog. A book she was reading. Carson listened more than he spoke, careful not to interrogate, careful not to disappear. At the end of the call, Lily hesitated. Dad. Yes. Mom says you might come out this summer. I'm planning to, Carson said. He didn't promise. Promises were heavy things. Oh, she nodded. That'd be cool. After they said goodbye, Carson sat for a long moment, phone dark in his hand. He didn't blame her for the distance. Distance was geography plus time plus circumstance. It wasn't personal. That didn't make it easier. Later that evening, Ellie knocked on his door. She'd texted earlier, "You busy?" And Carson had surprised himself by answering honestly. Not particularly. She stepped inside, glancing around with open curiosity. Very you. That's vague. Clean. Sparse. Intentional. Functional, he corrected. She smiled. You ever think about adding something just because it's nice? No. That tracks. They ate takeout on the couch, no plates, legs stretched out, the television off. Conversation came easily, but Ellie noticed the change in him almost immediately. You're quieter than usual, she said. Carson didn't deny it. Had a call earlier. She waited. My daughter. Ellie's expression softened, not with pity but recognition. How old is she? 10. She lives with her mom? Yes. Far. Far enough. Ellie nodded. That's hard. Carson considered the word. It's reality. That doesn't make it less hard, she said gently. He didn't respond right away. He wasn't used to people naming things he hadn't offered. I don't talk about it much, he said finally. I'm not asking you to, Ellie replied. Just letting you know I see it. That landed heavier than he expected. They sat in companionable silence for a while, the city murmuring outside. Eventually, Ellie stood and stretched. I should head home. Carson walked her to the door. Thank you, she said, pausing. For tonight. For the company? For letting me in, she said. Even a little. He nodded. You're welcome. She leaned in, kissed him. Slower this time, more deliberate. When she pulled back, she studied his face. You don't have to be alone in things, she said quietly. Then she left. Carson closed the door and rested his forehead against it for a moment. He wasn't alone, he told himself. He had friends, a routine, a life that worked. Still, Ellie's words lingered. The following weekend, Carson drove out to a park on the edge of the city, a place with long walking paths and enough space to think without interruption. He sat on a bench and watched families pass by. Parents arguing gently, kids running ahead, then circling back. He thought about Lily, about how loyalty, the thing he valued most, sometimes required presence more than intention. His phone buzzed. Ellie, want company? Or are you brooding professionally? He huffed a quiet laugh. Carson, observing. Ellie, that's a yes or a no? Carson, you can join me if you'd like. She arrived 20 minutes later, wearing a jacket and carrying 2 coffees. Black, she said, handing one to him. I remembered. He accepted it. Thank you. They walked side by side, no rush. Tell me about her, Ellie said eventually. He chose his words carefully. She's smart, kind, more self-possessed than I was at her age. You're proud. Yes. And sad. He didn't deny it. Ellie nodded. Distance doesn't erase connection. It just tests it. I don't want to fail her, Carson said. You won't, Ellie said. But you might have to redefine success. That stayed with him. They reached the end of the path and turned back. You know, Ellie said, I work with kids who have parents in the military, or who did. There's a particular kind of resilience they develop. Carson glanced at her. You didn't know. I suspected, she said. You move like someone who learned discipline under pressure. He considered telling her then. About the Marines. About the deployments. About the things he didn't say out loud. Not yet, he decided. Another time, he said. She didn't push. Another time. As the sun dipped lower, Carson felt something unfamiliar but not unwelcome. A sense that the distance he'd accepted as inevitable might not be permanent. The math was still changing. And for the first time, he wasn't trying to stop it. Chapter 4. Lines not crossed. Carson had always believed that boundaries were acts of respect. You didn't cross them unless invited. You didn't test them unless you were prepared to accept the consequences. And you certainly didn't blur them just because things felt good. That belief had kept his life orderly. It was also the reason he found himself standing in his kitchen on a Tuesday night, staring at his phone like it might detonate. Ellie's message sat unread no longer because he hadn't seen it, but because he had. Ellie, I'm making dinner tomorrow. Real food. No takeout. Wanna come over? Carson read it again. Dinner implied time. Time implied conversation. Conversation implied proximity. Proximity, if not managed carefully, implied attachment. He wasn't afraid of Ellie. That was the problem. He typed, deleted, typed again. Carson, tomorrow's fine. He set the phone down and exhaled slowly, as if he just agreed to something far more dangerous than a meal. Ellie's apartment was nothing like his. Where Carson's place was quiet and intentional, Ellie's felt lived in. Books stacked rather than shelved. A blanket draped casually over the arm of the couch. Small framed photos scattered along the walls. Nothing cluttered, but nothing sterile. She answered the door in socked feet and an oversized shirt, hair loose around her shoulders. You came, she said, smiling like it mattered. I said I would. I know, she replied. Still, the kitchen smelled like garlic and tomatoes. Carson clocked the knife placement, the clear counters, the way Ellie moved with competence rather than performance. You cook often? He asked. Enough to be dangerous, she said. Wine. No, thank you. She nodded, didn't comment. Another point in her favor. They ate at a small table by the window. The food was good, balanced, unpretentious. Carson told her so. I'll take that as a high compliment, Ellie said. You don't seem like someone who hands those out casually. I don't. She leaned her chin on her hand. You're very careful. Yes. Is that something you learned? Or something you decided? Carson considered the question. Both. She didn't press. Instead, she asked, do you ever get tired of being careful? The answer came faster than he expected. Sometimes. That surprised them both. After dinner, they sat on the couch. Close but not touching. The air between them felt charged, not with urgency, but with awareness. Ellie broke the silence. Can I ask you something? You can ask. Why haven't you told me about your past? Carson didn't stiffen. He didn't look away. He simply thought. I don't like being known for things I no longer am, he said. That's fair, she replied. But I'm not asking to define you by it. I just want to understand you. Understanding was dangerous, but honesty was loyalty's cousin. I was married, he said. Young. Before I understood what the cost would be. Ellie waited. I deployed. More than once. We didn't have the conversations we should have. She left while I was gone. I'm sorry. I'm not angry at her, Carson said. I was angry at myself for a long time. For what? For assuming commitment could survive silence. Ellie absorbed that quietly. And your daughter, she said. Yes, that distance isn't your fault. No, he agreed. But it is my responsibility. Ellie shifted closer. Not touching. Offering. You don't have to carry everything alone, she said again. I'm not asking for promises. Just presence. Presence. The thing he'd learned too late the first time. Carson stood. Ellie looked up at him, surprised but not offended. Did I say something wrong? No, he said. You said something right, and I need to be careful with that. He walked to the door, then paused. I like you, he said plainly, but I won't rush into something I can't give fully. Ellie rose, closing the distance between them. I don't want rushed. I want intentional. Their kiss this time was different. Slower, deeper, restrained by choice rather than hesitation. When they parted, both of them were breathing a little harder. This is a line, Carson said quietly. Ellie nodded. And we're choosing where it is. Yes, she smiled. I can work with that. As Carson walked home, the night felt sharper, more alive. Boundaries, he reminded himself, were acts of respect. But sometimes, choosing where to draw them mattered just as much as holding the line. And for the first time in a long while, Carson wasn't drawing his alone. Chapter 5, Old Armor. Carson hadn't spoken about the Marines in years. Not because the memories were sharp. Most of them had dulled into manageable shapes. But because the language never quite fit the experience. Words were either too small or too loud. He preferred silence to distortion. So when Ellie texted him on a rainy Sunday afternoon, Ellie, can I come over? I don't want to be alone with my thoughts today. His first instinct wasn't reluctance. It was assessment. She wasn't asking to be entertained. She wasn't asking to be rescued. She was asking for proximity. Carson, yes. She arrived with wet hair and a tote bag slung over her shoulder, eyes tired but steady. Carson took her coat, hung it neatly, handed her a towel without comment. She smiled at that. "You always anticipate needs," she said. "I pay attention," he replied. They settled on the couch, legs tucked beneath them, the sound of rain threading through the apartment. Ellie rested her mug on the coffee table and exhaled. "My dad called," she said. "He's fine, just aging. It hits me sometimes." Carson nodded. Mortality has a way of announcing itself quietly. She looked at him. "You've thought about that?" "Yes." She leaned back, considering him. "You know, I don't think I've ever met someone so comfortable with silence." "I wasn't always," Carson said. That earned his own surprise. He hadn't planned to say it. Ellie didn't react immediately. She waited, as if she understood this wasn't a door to rush through. "When weren't you?" she asked gently. Carson stared at the rain-streaked window. The words came without rehearsal. "When everything was noise," he said. "Orders, engines, radios. You didn't get silence unless something had gone wrong." Ellie's breath hitched slightly. "You were military." "Yes." She didn't say I knew it. She didn't say I thought so. She simply nodded, absorbing the truth without claiming ownership of it. "Marines," Carson continued. "Force recon." She swallowed. "That's intense." "It was a job." "It was more than that," she said. He didn't argue. "It required armor. Physical. Emotional. You learned to compartmentalize because there wasn't room for anything else." Ellie shifted closer, not touching. "And when you came home?" "You don't need armor at home," Carson said. "But you don't know how to take it off all at once. So you set it down piece by piece. And some parts stick," she said. "Yes." He told her then, carefully without detail, about the deployments, about coming back to a marriage already ended, about reading legal documents in a place where the sky didn't feel real. "I missed the chance to fight for it," he said. "Not because she was wrong, but because I wasn't there." Ellie's voice was steady. "You were serving. I was absent," Carson replied. "Both things can be true." She reached for his hand then. Not tentative, not forceful, just present. "You didn't abandon them," she said. "Circumstances did." "I don't believe in absolution," Carson said quietly. "Just responsibility." Ellie squeezed his hand once. "Then let me say this as someone outside it. You did the best you could with what you had. That matters." Carson closed his eyes briefly. Later, when Ellie left, Carson remained on the couch long after the rain stopped. He thought about armor, about how it protected but also isolated, about how easy it was to forget you were still wearing it when the war ended. Ellie hadn't tried to take it from him. She'd simply acknowledged it existed, and that, Carson realized, was its own kind of trust. The math wasn't simple anymore, but it was honest. Chapter 6. The hard conversation. Carson didn't sleep much that night, not because of nightmares, those had thinned with time, but because his mind kept returning to the same point of friction. The moment Ellie had taken his hand and named what he carried without trying to fix it. He wasn't used to that kind of attention. Not the admiring kind, the accurate kind. By morning, he'd decided on two things. First, avoidance would cost more than honesty. Second, if he was going to continue this, then he needed to do the thing he'd failed to do years ago. Have the hard conversation before circumstance forced it. Ellie answered his call on the third ring. "Hey," she said. "You okay?" "Yes," he replied. Then, after a beat, "I'd like to talk. In person." Her tone shifted, not alarmed but attentive. "Okay, my place? Or yours?" "Yours," he said. "If that's all right." "It is," she said. "Come by tonight." Ellie lit a lamp instead of the overhead when Carson arrived. The apartment felt warmer for it, softer around the edges. She didn't offer food or drink right away. She simply sat across from him on the couch, legs tucked beneath her, hands loosely clasped. "You look like you've decided something," she said. "I have." She nodded. "Then talk." Carson rested his forearms on his knees, hands open. He'd learned long ago that closed fists sent the wrong message. "I don't date casually," he said. "Not because I judge people who do. Because I don't know how to be present halfway." Ellie's expression didn't change. She was listening. "When I commit," he continued, "I do it with the expectation that I will show up, consistently, honestly, even when it's uncomfortable, especially then." "That sounds like a good thing," she said. "It is," Carson agreed. "But it also means I don't move forward unless I believe I can meet that standard." Ellie considered that. "And you're not sure you can, with me?" "I'm sure I want to," he said. "I'm not sure what it would cost." She didn't flinch. "Tell me." Carson inhaled slowly. "My daughter comes first. Always. That won't change. There will be times when my attention is divided, when my emotional energy is spent elsewhere. I won't compete with anyone for that space, and I won't ask someone to compete with her." "I wouldn't," Ellie said quietly. "I know," he replied. "But I need to say it anyway." She nodded. "Okay. I don't do ultimatums. I don't make promises I'm not certain I can keep. and I don't recover well from silence when something matters. Ellie leaned forward slightly. Meaning? Meaning if something's wrong, I need to talk about it, Carson said. Not circle it. Not wait it out. I learned what happens when you assume love will survive avoidance. Ellie was quiet for a long moment. Then she smiled, small and sad and understanding all at once. You're describing exactly the relationship I want, she said. Carson blinked. I am. Yes, she said. Not because it's perfect. Because it's intentional. She shifted closer, still leaving space. Let me be clear too. He nodded. Please. I'm not looking to be someone's distraction, Ellie said, or their reward for finally slowing down. I want to build something that fits into real life. Messy schedules, hard days, competing priorities. Carson listened, steady. I won't ask you to choose between me and your daughter, she continued. But I also won't disappear quietly if I feel shut out. I need communication. Not constant reassurance, just honesty. That's fair, Carson said. And, she added, I won't rush you, but I won't stay in a holding pattern forever either. He absorbed that. No threat, no pressure, just truth. This is the conversation I didn't have before, Carson said softly. Not like this. Ellie's voice gentled. Then I'm glad you're having it now. They sat with that, the weight of it settling rather than pressing down. Carson stood, paced once, then stopped. There's one more thing. Ellie waited. I don't get angry easily, he said. But when I do, I go quiet. It's not punishment. It's regulation. I will always come back to the conversation, but I might need time. She nodded. I can work with that. As long as you tell me you're coming back. I will. She stood too, closing the distance between them. So, Ellie said, where does that leave us? Carson looked at her. Really looked. The steadiness. The warmth without softness. The way she didn't confuse patience with passivity. It leaves us choosing each other, he said. Deliberately, without guarantees. Ellie smiled. Good. I don't trust guarantees anyway. Their kiss this time wasn't restrained. It was still careful but not guarded. Carson felt the difference immediately. It wasn't urgency. It was alignment. When they broke apart, Ellie rested her forehead against his. You know, she said, this might be the least romantic conversation I've ever found deeply attractive. He huffed a quiet laugh. I'll take that as a compliment. You should. Later, as Carson walked home, the city felt unchanged. But he didn't. He'd spent years believing the lesson was to armor up, simplify, avoid unnecessary risk. But maybe the real lesson was this. Loyalty wasn't just staying. It was speaking before leaving became inevitable. And this time, Carson had spoken in time. Chapter 7. Forward is not the same as fast. Carson learned quickly that choosing something didn't mean it stopped requiring choice. That was the quiet truth of commitment. There was no finish line where effort ceased. There was only consistency applied daily without spectacle. Ellie didn't change his routine so much as she stepped into it. She started showing up on Saturday mornings with coffee and an unspoken agreement not to talk until he'd had half of it. She learned the cadence of his silences, the difference between thinking and withdrawing. He learned that her humor sharpened when she was tired, that she organized her thoughts by talking them out, and that she hated feeling dismissed more than she hated being disagreed with. They didn't rush. They didn't stall. They moved forward at a pace that respected weight. One evening, Carson found himself at Ellie's kitchen table with his laptop open, calendar pulled up. He hadn't announced what he was doing. He simply did it. Ellie noticed anyway. What's that look? Planning, he said. That could mean several things. He turned the screen toward her. I want to visit Lily next month. I'd like you to come with me. Ellie didn't respond immediately. She didn't smile. She didn't reach for his hand. She asked the right question. As what? Carson met her gaze. As someone in my life. Not as an introduction. Not as a test. Just present. She considered that carefully. You don't want me to meet her yet? No, he said. Not until I'm certain it won't complicate her world. This trip is about me showing up better. You being there would support that, not replace it. Ellie nodded slowly. I appreciate you saying that. I won't blur lines when children are involved, Carson said. I learned that lesson the hard way. Ellie reached across the table and took his hand. Then yes, I'll come. The trip was quiet and unremarkable in the best way. Carson spent time with Lily, walking, talking, listening. He didn't overcompensate. He didn't apologize for the past. He showed up where he was now. Ellie stayed nearby but never intruded. She read on park benches. She explored small shops. She smiled at Lily from a distance when their paths crossed and did nothing to claim familiarity. On the last day, Lily hugged Carson longer than usual. You can come again, she said. Not a question. Yes, Carson replied. I will. Ellie watched from the car, heart full but careful. That night, back at the hotel, Carson sat beside her on the bed, shoulders heavy with emotion he didn't try to hide. You did good, Ellie said. I did better, he corrected. She smiled. Forward, then. Yes, he said. Forward. Not fast. Just honest. Chapter 8. The math changes. The quiet returned differently after the trip. Not heavier. Not fragile. Settled. Carson noticed it first in the mornings. He still woke at 5:30, still moved through his routine with practiced efficiency. But now there was an extra line in the equation. Ellie will text by 8 or Wednesday dinner, or remember to tell her about Lily's science project. None of it felt intrusive. It felt integrated. Like something finally had a place. Ellie noticed it too, though she named it differently. You're less braced, she told him one night as they walked back to his apartment. Hands brushing but not yet linked. Like you're not waiting for impact. I stopped assuming equilibrium meant isolation, Carson said. She smiled. That might be the most romantic thing anyone's ever said to me. He huffed quietly. I'll add it to my repertoire. They didn't move in together. They didn't talk about timelines. They talked about logistics, how to share space without losing themselves, how to argue without retreat, how to stay present when life inevitably pulled. Carson scheduled his next visit with Lily before the first had faded. He didn't ask permission from guilt or doubt. He just did it. One evening, weeks later, Ellie sat on his couch while he cooked. She watched him move through the kitchen with unhurried competence. You know, she said, when I first met you, I thought you were hiding. I was, he replied, but not from myself, from variables. And now I account for them. She stood, came up behind him, rested her chin lightly between his shoulders. He didn't tense. He didn't freeze. He leaned back into her. That's new, she murmured. Yes, he said. It is. Later, as they sat together in the quiet, no television, no distractions, Ellie spoke softly. I don't need fireworks, she said. I need consistency. Carson turned to her, expression steady, voice certain. Then stay. She didn't answer immediately. She didn't need to. She rested her head against his shoulder. I am. Carson exhaled, slow and even. For years, he'd believed peace was the absence of conflict. He understood now that peace was the presence of trust. The math hadn't become simple, but it had become shared. And for the first time since he'd taken off his armor, Carson Drews felt something stronger than safety. He felt home. Chapter 9. Quiet, shared. The thing Carson noticed most, months later, was how unremarkable the happiness felt. Not dull, not diminished. Unremarkable in the way solid ground was unremarkable after years of uneven footing. It was a Tuesday evening when it struck him, an ordinary one. He was standing at the stove, stirring something Ellie had taught him how to make, while she sat at the small kitchen table grading notes from work. The window was open just enough to let in the sound of the city settling down for the night. No urgency, no tension, just presence. Ellie looked up from her papers. You're staring. I'm thinking, Carson said. That can be dangerous. He huffed softly. I used to think peace meant nothing changing. And now? She asked. Now I think peace means change that doesn't require armor. She studied him for a long moment, then smiled. Not wide, not teasing. The smile she reserved for moments that mattered. You're different, she said. I know. Do you miss the old version? Carson considered it honestly. No, he said. He did what he had to do, but he wasn't built to stay that way. Ellie rose, came to stand beside him, slipped her arm around his waist. He leaned into the contact without thinking about it. That, more than anything, told him how far he'd come. Later that night, Carson sat on the couch with his laptop open, the glow soft in the dim room. Ellie curled up beside him, legs tucked beneath her, head resting against his shoulder. Lily sent a message, he said. Ellie didn't sit up. Good. Yes, Carson said. She asked if you were the Ellie I talk about. Ellie smiled into his shoulder. And what did you say? I said yes, Carson replied. And that you were important to me. Ellie went still, not tense, just attentive. And? She asked. She said she'd like to meet you, when the time is right. Ellie lifted her head then, eyes searching his. How do you feel about that? Carson didn't hesitate. Ready. That was the truth of it. Not eager, not fearful. Ready. Ellie reached up, brushed her thumb along his jaw. You're a good father. I'm trying to be a better one, he said. That counts. They sat quietly after that, the kind of silence that didn't need filling. Carson thought about loyalty, how he'd once believed it was endurance alone. Stay. Survive. Hold the line. He understood now that loyalty also meant vulnerability. It meant choosing to be seen again and again, even when retreat would be easier. Ellie shifted, yawning softly. You know what I love about you? He glanced down at her. What? You never confuse calm with indifference, she said. You're here. Completely. Carson pressed a kiss to her hair. So are you. When they finally turned off the lights, Carson lay awake for a moment, listening to Ellie's breathing even out beside him. The old reflex, to scan, to guard, to prepare, stirred briefly, then faded. There was nothing to defend against, no perimeter to hold, just a life that asked him to remain present. Boring, some people would call it. Carson smiled faintly in the dark. He knew better. It wasn't boring. It was earned. And for the first time, the quiet wasn't something he guarded alone. It was something he shared.